In May 2025, the Republican-controlled U.S. House narrowly passed a bill to codify President Trump's January executive order renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, reflecting a symbolic reaffirmation of U.S. regional dominance. At the same time, Trump's resumption of aggressive trade policies, tariffs on imports from China, Canada, and Mexico, has driven shipping companies and ports to consider alternative routes and tighter U.S. control over the Panama Canal, a key maritime choke point that Trump has publicly threatened to take back from foreign influence, according to Associated Press. Taken together, these moves suggest an integrated approach, reshaping regional nomenclature and trade flows while laying groundwork, both diplomatic and military, for increased U.S. leverage over critical infrastructure in Central America. Since January 2025, President Trump's second term has been marked by executive orders and agency directives aimed at removing or reframing race and diversity content across federal museums, military sites, and educational institutions, a move critics label as an attempt to erase uncomfortable chapters of American history. This effort dovetails with symbolic acts such as renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America and tariff-driven pressure on the Panama Canal, each reinforcing a narrative of uncontested U.S. primacy in the Western Hemisphere and beyond. All of this offends the Black conscious community, now described as adherents to so-called Negroism. Proponents of Negroism believe transatlantic slave trade descendants in the Americas and Europe, as well as connected groups in Africa, are experiencing a socio-political and even spiritual awakening. They claim Trump's actions are a direct attack against that awakening.
So, I think his goal is to start erasing artifacts and geopolitical markers of Negro history so that future generations of Black America can't verify or trust our discoveries about Negro identity.
Creek Indian shaman UNEHIYA claims the Negro is a specific international ethnic group of Black people distinct from most African peoples. He says they're not only indigenous to lands like the Americas and Australia, but also that they're the descendants of ancient biblical Israel.
The Panama Canal's a chess piece in Trump's trade war with China and Mexico and others, and reasserting maritime borders throughout the Gulf is like marketing for a Panama grab. However, it has the added bonus of obscuring the histories of not only my people, but also several other indigenous Gulf Coast tribes, which makes it harder for my grandchildren to find the evidence I found about our people, since sources will refer to the Gulf of Mexico, while all public sector sources refer to the Gulf of America. Reclassifying our waters will throw some people off the same way reclassifying our people did.
On January 20th, 2025, President Trump signed Executive Order 14172, directing federal agencies to replace Gulf of Mexico with Gulf of America in all internal documents. On May 8, 2025, the House of Representatives passed the Gulf of America Act 211-206 to make this change permanent, overriding future administrations unless Congress acts again. Major oil firms including Chevron, BP, and Shell have adopted Gulf of America in filings, reflecting corporate alignment with federal policy, while international bodies and media like Britain's Ordnance Survey continue saying Gulf of Mexico. It's now labeled Gulf of America by Google Maps. Mexico's government and other Gulf-bordering nations have rejected the renaming, maintaining the historic term in their official usage. Since January 20th, 2025, the Trump administration has imposed a sweeping 10% tariff on most imports plus targeted 25% levies on steel, aluminum, and autos, triggering global reprisals and supply chain disruptions. These policies have driven shipping lines to reconsider routes, with some executives warning of congestion and higher fees at the Panama Canal as shippers seek alternatives. Trump has publicly vowed to take back the Panama Canal, accusing Panama of allowing Chinese influence to undermine U.S. interests. The allegation is focused on Hutchison, a Hong Kong-based port operator. In March 2025, BlackRock led a consortium to purchase Hutchison's Panama port holdings, widely seen as a response to U.S. pressure and part of a de facto shift toward American commercial control. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has been tasked with presenting military options to secure fair and unfettered U.S. access to the canal, and a joint use of Panama security deal now permits U.S. troop presence at canal facilities with Panamanian consent. Renaming the Gulf signals a Monroe Doctrine-style reaffirmation of U.S. primacy in the hemisphere, framing regional waterways as inherently American. Broad tariffs disrupt traditional trade flows through the Panama Canal, giving the U.S. leverage to demand concessions or more favorable transit terms, thus strengthening the case for closer military and commercial integration with Panama. Combined, the legislative codification, trade measures, and security arrangements create a multi-pronged approach. Impose nominal U.S. naming rights, reshape trade routes under tariff pressure, then institutionalize U.S. presence in Panama, paving the way for potential formal control over the canal itself. Yes, the Gulf of Mexico holds deep historical significance for both African Americans and Native Americans, and forgetting its original name could risk obscuring key aspects of their histories tied to that body of water. Here's why. The Gulf Coast, especially ports in New Orleans, Mobile, and Pensacola, was a major point of entry for enslaved Africans brought into the U.S. South from the Caribbean or directly from Africa. Forgetting the name Gulf of Mexico could obscure its connection to this brutal transnational system. New Orleans became one of the largest slave markets in North America. The Gulf was not just a site of bondage, it was also a place of escape, with many enslaved Africans attempting to flee via the water or find routes to freedom through Spanish Florida or Mexico. The Gulf region was a major conduit for Afro-Caribbean culture, including music, religion, e.g., syncretic Christianity, voodoo, cuisine, and dialects, into the U.S. Gulf South. This cross-cultural identity is anchored to the Gulf's geography and name. The Gulf Coast was home to numerous indigenous peoples, including the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Muskogee, Creek, Seminole, Attakapas, and Karankawa. Their spiritual, economic, and social lives were intertwined with the waters of the Gulf. Many Seminoles sailed across the Gulf to establish refugee havens in Mexico. Meanwhile, the Attakapas roamed near the Gulf in modern Texas, known for their dark complexion and identifying as the Eshok, believed by some to be a pre-Columbian reference to Isaac, a patriarch of ancient Israel. That's a key find for Black Hebrew Israelites and Indian freedmen, but some fear the Trump administration's policies might make one of the keywords used to find such information less valuable. And that keyword is Gulf of Mexico.
We're talking about the nexus of Jewish Indian theory and Black Hebrew Israelite theory. A lot of books like that of Dr. J.O. Dyer on the Lake Charles Attakapas use the term Gulf of Mexico. In 2 generations, some of our people won't even see the significance of that, assuming they find it at all.
The Gulf was involved in the Indian Removal Act era, especially the Trail of Tears, which saw many southeastern tribes forcibly removed across or near the Gulf region to territories west of the Mississippi. The Gulf supported native economies based on fishing, shellfish harvesting, trade, and canoe travel. Its name links to centuries of maritime traditions. Renaming the Gulf of America might blur the fact that this water body historically linked the Americas, Africa, and Europe through slavery, migration, and trade. It could also contribute to the erasure of colonial and indigenous histories, reinforcing a myth of uniform U.S. ownership rather than complex shared heritage. Impede future generations from recognizing the global and multi-ethnic legacy embedded in that name and coastline. Regardless of whether you buy into Negro Semitism or Black indigeneity, the erasure of Black history isn't debatable. In March 2025, Trump issued Executive Order 14253, directing the Smithsonian Institution to strip exhibits and narratives deemed divisive or race-centered, explicitly calling out the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Following that order, the Smithsonian reviewed artifacts and books loaned by civil rights leaders, raising alarms that preservation justifications masked a political purge. Defense Secretary directives, under the same executive framework, led to the removal of DEI-related content from DoD websites, including profiles of Tuskegee Airmen and Navajo Code Talkers. At West Point, courses on race, gender, and power dynamics were eliminated and professors barred from teaching or researching DEI topics without approval, prompting faculty resignations. Trump's Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History order threatened to withhold federal funding from schools that refused to end DEI programs, signaling a nationwide curricular shift. Textbooks, museum exhibits, and even online portals like the National Park Service pages on Harriet Tubman were scrubbed or altered, prompting backlash from historians and civil rights groups. In response, community-led initiatives like the Web Archiving School in Atlanta are training memory workers to preserve Black history digitally, countering institutional erasure. Digital platforms and independent syllabi or crowdsourced learning lists have surged, ensuring access to materials removed from official channels. The Freedom to Learn campaign, led by Kimberly Crenshaw and the African American Policy Forum, staged panels and a rally at MAC to protest Trump's museum directives, framing the purge as an attempt to erase America's difficult chapters. Relatedly, UNEHIYA, a Black Indian lobbying firm, is campaigning to amend legislation to get Black Americans recognized as a predominantly American Indian ethnic group with African admixture. House Democrats, including Representatives Ayanna Pressley and Paul Tonko, have called for an inspector general probe into Trump's museum order, arguing it violates the Smithsonian's nonpartisan mandate. Just as renaming the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America symbolically reinforces U.S. claims over a shared body of water, sanitizing Black history recasts the nation's narrative to one of unblemished greatness, marginalizing dissenting voices. By controlling both geographic nomenclature and historical narrative, the administration seeks to project an image of uncontested American hegemony, from Mexico in the South to global institutions. Parallel to these cultural moves, Trump's tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China have rerouted trade and empowered talks on U.S. Panama Canal security, with BlackRock's purchase of Hutchison Ports in Panama seen as a de facto American takeover. Pentagon planning documents and a new U.S. Panama Security Pact now contemplate U.S. troop presence at canal facilities, mirroring the soft power of renaming Gulf waters with the hard power of military basing. Scholars warn that erasing history is a classic authoritarian tactic, whether burning books or purging archives, to weaken minority groups' sense of belonging and resistance. Civil rights advocates view the Trump administration's dual assault on geography and history as part of a larger effort to redefine America, from its physical borders to its collective memory.
The Trump administration's censorship of Black history is more than cultural revisionism. It's a cog in a much broader strategy that combines reclassification, economic coercion, and security maneuvers to reassert unchallenged U.S. control, both of the narrative and the strategic landscape. It's ironically a play out of the Chinese playbook, insisting that the ethnic groups who created the country forget themselves, and that the borders of influence never stop expanding to control trade. If the Gulf is the South China Sea, the Negro is the Uyghur.